Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us here at Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital business revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are profoundly changing how the world works, lives, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Ganesh Kumar, Senior Executive Vice President of Oriental Bank, where Ganesh is leading an aggressive digital transformation initiative. Ganesh, thanks very much for joining us. Ganesh, the banking world that you're in, so many changes, so many rising expectations from consumers. You've got regulatory issues to think about. You've got technology issues coming into this. Where do you get started on this, and what's been going on with your bank?
Well, as you might have known, Puerto Rico is a very well-developed financial market. At one point in time, we had multinationals from Spain and as well as from Canada. We had 8 branches. Now we are whittled down to sort of 3 plus 2. When I say plus 2, they are multinationals which have lost interest to the market. So it's a very highly saturated market, and our challenges are a little bit more magnified because we are an island, and we are competing for the same sort of people that's in the island. As a challenger brand, we have sort of embarked on a path to differentiate ourselves from traditional banking. How do we do? So, you might have heard from other banks on convenience play, right? So that's the angle that we also caught on. But the way we like to do it is we want to make the banking more easy, more convenient, but at the same time we want to add value to the relationship. So in other words, we don't want to be sitting in the branch and taking your request, but you should be able to do that, most of it on your digital platform. And while we use our resources to provide, Bob, you have this money sitting over here, do you want to invest, what are your life goals, those kind of things. So our background has been, we do have a bank, and we also have a broker dealer advisory firm, and also insurance. So it's all of a full spectrum of products. How do we bring those full spectrum of products? I think you asked the question of where do we start, and I always look at it from a Venn diagram perspective. If I do something for the customers, it needs to be profitable for the banks and meet bank's objective, if not the profit, long-term growth or something like that. So it's the same thing with the regulatory aspects as well. We do not take any regulatory initiative or project as a regulatory project. Like, for instance, we are now looking into refining our approach doing BSA AML, which is a hot button topic. But if you just approach that as a regulatory effort, it becomes no-win situation for the bank. But at the same time, it captures a lot of information about the customers, right? So that wealth of information, how do you tap into that and utilize that for the business, is what differentiates us from other institutions that might approach this. This is a regulatory project, this is a web project for the customer, or this is a banking internal project. So I think the clear set of guidelines for us is really that Venn diagram. I keep saying that, and whenever I go into a meeting, they always draw a Venn diagram on the whiteboard and make fun of me, but I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that's more and more in today's world how things have to be viewed, and not this sort of Newtonian or just linear progression of things. They're interrelated and interdependent.
Correct. Yeah. And as a banker, all bankers would say they are not a big fan of regulatory regime, which is partly true. But at the same time, if you do what's best for the customers, the regulation should matter a little bit lesser for you. It's not so onerous to follow. Yeah. And if you are not taking that step proactively, regulations would push you to take that.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Ganesh, could you talk a little bit more about what you had said a minute ago about consumers today expect the banking experience to be convenient, and you want to go beyond that. So when you go beyond, what does that mean for the consumer?
Like, for instance, I think, what is the role of the bank? The role of the bank needs to change, right? It cannot be we are going to set up points of presence, and for each and every transaction, so you either call into the bank or you have to come to the branch and make you do those things. In these days, the same consumers are the ones who are experiencing the convenience of Amazon and all the other products, and they start. Personally, I would expect the same thing from our bank too. So if I had some things that I need to do as part of day-to-day leading my life and utilizing bank's product, I should be able to tap into those services where I want, not necessarily get on a car and use the gas and drive to some location for 15 minutes and wait in the line for 15 minutes. So what we're trying to do is to push out. Not one vendor provider is going to give you that kind of solution, because then everybody would have it, right? So each bank needs to approach it in a different way. So what we are doing is we are prioritizing where we see traffic, foot traffic, and we sort of look at the customer engagement as value-added interactions and non-value-added interactions. Non-value-added interaction is where customer gives up a little bit of his convenience, comes to the bank to get things done that they need not have come into our bank. Value-added transaction is I'm calling Bob proactively, and it's a 6 monthly conversation or a 3 months conversation to see whether you're achieving your financial goals, the bank is treating you well, those kind of things, right? It can be even tactical. It can say, Bob, yesterday I found that your credit card was denied, or debit card was denied. Is there anything that, I'm sure you solved the problem, is there anything that we can do to prevent that? So those are value-added interactions. So we acutely kind of look at the engagements and classify them. Unfortunately, we are heavily weighted towards non-value-added transaction. Our digital transformation is a path that we've taken to get from here to here, right? So I think that's kind of clearly gives us a litmus test for what initiative to pursue. We're not writing science projects over here, right? At the end of the day. And that's where it fits into the Venn diagram that I told you about. So, ultimate thing is, if there's a call center for 150 people, can you reduce the call volume so that you can run the call center, if need be, in a different way with lesser number of people? What does that provide for the consumer is you're eliminating the need to call in. So it's a double play, and I think that's our sweet spot.
Yeah. So Ganesh, digital transformation, a term that's widely used, sometimes overused or misused, but clearly from a couple of things you've said here, it's at the heart and soul of what you're doing. Could you talk a little bit about that journey?
Sure. And as I said, we are not a big fans of buzzwords, and when people talk about vendors talk about omni-channel, this, that, and as we sort of roll our eyes primarily because what they might be referring to is probably a good case study to read, but not necessarily good for the bank, right? So again, you will know at the end of this conversation, you reuse the word Venn diagram again and again and again, right? One is bank profitability, the other one is customer convenience, and I need to be able to do operational efficiencies, third aspect of it. So obviously, we need to hit on all those things. The sweet spot is where I have to be all the time. I'm not going to do most of the customer innovation projects, if you look at it, they get carried away with all these newfangled things coming in. Like, for instance, can I ask my Amazon Echo to check my balances? Really, we've done few of those things too, but we're not very shy to sort of pull the plug on it. For instance, today we have a feature called cardless cash access, which was widely received, widely publicized, and it was the talk of the town. So that feature we publicized because it showed our sort of digital edge. We used it for marketing purposes. Unfortunately, the adoption levels were pretty low. So what do? So in this, when you're doing something new in transformation, I do believe that you should not shy in experimenting, but at the same time, you should be disciplined enough to roll back some of these things and focus on the core things that customers are accepting. And so we are at a point in time we have to evaluate what the adoption levels, whether we can improve. If not, does it take us to the next level to achieving that transformation? So the thing that you asked me is digital transformation. Everybody talks different stories, but I think we have in Spanish, we summarize the value proposition for our customers, and it's called Rapido, Fácil, y Hecho. Rapido is fast, Fácil is easy, and Hecho is done, right? So we take the same mantra and apply it internally as well. For instance, a Workday implementation. What do we want? People would say it's the same thing, right? Any different task that you take, performance appraisal or benefits enrollment, we want Rapido, Fácil, y Hecho. So that's how we sort of made it a little bit easier for people to say, is it easy? It is done, that kind of thing.
Those three pieces fit almost into a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's by intention and design. Yeah, exactly.
So, Ganesh, if you would to talk a little bit about the role of technology in this, and you've got a sort of a sweeping set of responsibilities, the strategy, the transformation here, a number of things. In some ways, technology is indispensable to that, but do you think sometimes do people get carried away a little bit of what you were just saying with what technology can do versus what it should do?
Technology is very hard to get it right? Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously in banking we provide, I don't want to mention the name, but you might have heard this because you've been around, the banking sector for a while. Banking is nothing but bits and bytes. It might resonate who it is, and we can talk about it later. That sort of drilled down. I heard this when I was 20 years old, and that sort of drilled into my mind. Well, you can provide banking, anywhere, right? But value add comes from people, and there are a lot of people out there, business community and consumers alike. They need help managing their finances. Mm-hmm. And to us, I think the most important thing is to eliminate, as you said, non-value added transaction. Because when I started, with the bank, most of the branches we grew up to 65 branches, and then we cut back to 38 branches. Mm-hmm. Primarily because we realized most of them come there for very mundane transactions, check deposit, pay bill, this, that, which they could have done. So for us, I think the first effort is getting the technology right in addressing those things that we can address, we can position as value add for the customers. Convenience play or value add. And then to me, I think the technology, if you have such a razor focus objective, you can get things done. But if you're creating a platform to achieve things that you don't know of, then that's when people run into problem of overscoping it, getting all the things wrong, and those kind of things. So we've always been a big fan of, when we implement, we have core set of objectives to be clear on what we need to achieve out of that, at least for the next year or so. We cannot crystal ball 5 years because things change, but at least for the next 12 months we were clear. And that same thing we applied with the Workday as well. That's the same approach we applied. So I was talking about, most people would get started with, I want to do payroll, I want to do benefits enroll. No, we looked at how can we get the information at the fingertips of people who want to use it, because prior to that we didn't have the capability. One of the things, if you indulge me with the story, as a head of the banking, retail banking, I do go around the branches, and it's very hard with my failing memory to remember, all the 38 people, all the 38 branches, and 8 people in each, 8-person branch, and you can do the math. And we do have job rotations and turnovers and things like that. So earlier the conversation was, I would shake hands, and by the time I go over there, that person might have gone or whatever it is. So it's very hard to remember. And the purpose of going over to the branches as an executive is they need to kind of say, okay, this person is accessible. He shows interest in my my work, my personal circumstances, things like that. So with Workday, I do have an app. The first thing that I do is, before I enter a branch, look into the app, and it's got, everybody talks about 360-degree view of the customer, but it's not the 360-degree view of the employee, right? I can drill down to the performance form and see some of the comments that they might have given in response to their manager's feedback, and I specifically ask the question of, what do you think about that? So that is a lot more powerful in establishing the rapport and connection for all the managers, and more than saying, I'm able to do the benefits enrollment or some procedural stuff, right? So I think the people engagement is clearly should be the motive, and that should be the one that's leading the implementations of these platforms rather than operational reasons.
There was earlier today, we're here at Workday Rising, and there was a panel discussion involving some of the C-level executives from Workday, and a couple of them said that they use, Workday HR, and they said that the Workday people are just brutal critics of the system. Anything that they don't love, all the executives, we hear about it.
Yeah. So and I think that's where the advantage is. I want to say we are the same level of the financial information, but we are getting there. We're not
Okay.
there yet. We're in the process of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ganesh, look ahead a little bit. When you do get there, what will be different? What will you be able to do then that you're not quite able to do yet?
Well, from a workday perspective, or
Yeah, with the financials and then overall.
okay, as I said, the bank has transformed itself in terms of its outlook and its strategy, right? So it's not just a marketing speak. We practice that. So in order to do so, we've demolished a lot of institutions that were there inside the organization, such as the organization structure was a very business unit, product oriented business unit, but we have now what we call as the retail channel, taking care of the channel, which is more customer centric, and the organization that I head, which is the retail channel, has everything that needs to serve the customer from top to bottom, including technology. So it's not to say we are creating another silos, but it's orienting ourselves more towards the customer, and we can be responsive to serve the customer base. Part of the puzzle is obviously the workday and the integration that it provides between the financials and human resources. So not only at the decision, when we make more decisions at restructuring, let's say, the branch to have, instead of 8 people with different roles, we have 4 people with totally different roles, as you said, to do value add transaction. Everything that you need to go through in terms of setting performance objectives, having quarterly conversations for feedback sessions, monitoring the performance, those things happen through the platform at this point in time. So what could happen when we have the financials fully done? Well, the financial aspects of it would come into play, right?
Okay.
So right now it's not there. It's one of my goals to use Prism, which is what they have as a data warehouse solution, is to bring banking oriented data, so you have this one single repository that will not only have people data and also the financial data which Workday provides, but I would like to bring in the banking data and the business data, so we can have one repository to look into. And I think that's going to be powerful, and hopefully we get there sooner than later. It's just been sort of the holy grail for most of the banks to have that one source of information. So
I remember the first time I heard somebody use that term, a single instance of truth. And I remember when I first heard it, I said, well,
I wouldn't go as far as saying truth, but representation of reality.
How you bring a nice philosophical perspective on things, Ganesh. That's representation of reality. Okay, until we get a better representation of reality. But what you said a couple minutes ago about the reorganization, I think with a lot of the digital transformation research that I look at, companies I talk to, if you look at some and say, well, we're struggling with this or that, the ones that seem to be doing it really well, the first step is, as you said before, the company was organized to suit certain perhaps old-fashioned company issues or structures. They weren't necessarily oriented toward the outside world. The companies that are being successful in remaking themselves put the customer dead center, and then, okay, how do we organize ourselves around that? And as you've been saying, not just around the customer, but around the high value or value added parts of that customer.
So I think we realized that quite some time back. A lot of people would listen to this and say, hey, you went from one siloed structure to another siloed structure, but we basically say, well, if you want to call that a silo, that's fine, but at least I'm more responsive to the customer, right? But there are common parts of the organization, so I see that as a sort of a lattice work of, because, the more silo you create, more inefficient you become. But whereas what we've done, so in the common, shared services area, like for IT, or typical failing of an IT is they are too far removed, not very responsive. They don't know business. You might have heard this 10 excuses or complaints about IT, and then you go on the IT side and they would tell you 10 things about the business, right? So we went through the same thing too. I mean, we have the same problem. We're not any different. So recently we started looking into what we call as the competency centers. And for the first time, because the velocity of change that you need to do is not exactly the same as what it used to be. Because earlier, IT can say, give me the specifications and I will look into it for 3 months, and I will do something, and it reminds me of a Dilbert comic. One time I read the strip. It says the managers, I forgot, he says, so start programming this. I'll go find out what they want. So, so what we do is this competency center. We brought in people who are motivated, who know about the business and the processes, and at the same time we brought in technology architects who are good gatekeepers and guardians of what should not happen to prevent fragmentation of technical landscape and creating spaghetti architecture and things like that. So that's a sort of path that I want to just testing it out right now, but I want to implement that way we become more agile. I think the important thing to me is that the responsiveness to change from an organizational perspective is much more shorter cycles.
Yeah.
So we used to have good IT team. Our IT team is very capable of implementing large-scale projects which span over more than a year or whatever it is. I don't want to demolish that, but what I want to create is the organizational capability and the nimbleness to respond to short, continuous changes. And that we lacked. And I think that's most of the times, I think that's where the technology fails. It's not that they're not good at driving projects, they're very good at that, but it's the sort of, the more continuous change, the evolutionary change. I think that's what organizations do lack.
Yeah, and Ganesh, I was always baffled when you would hear CIOs say, well, the job of my organization is to support the business. I just think that's deadly, right? Because the first thing you're saying is you're not part of the business. You're detached from it.
Exactly.
So what are you then? You're a cost center. Well,
Yeah.
you know what happens at cost centers.
Exactly.
And I always imagined it too, like at a holiday, you had the kids table, and the IT folks seem to
be always on the
go to
kids.
the kids table, and we will be told what to do by the grown-ups at the big table, and they'll give us a plan, and we'll race to try to keep up, but we're trying to play catch-up. And especially today, as you've said, with how quickly things are changing, the expectations are rising from customers. So
and I was asked the same question in one of the forums that I was, how did you decide, how did you convince the CFO that we want to go, you had IT, and how did you convince the CFO that you want to make this implementation and invest? And I said, all it took me was a 5-minute conversation. And I said, how is that possible? Because I had both IT and finance at the same time, so it was easy to convince me. So, but that's just a joke. but going back to your point, the bank, I think it's a very very successful bank in adapting technology. Both CEO, myself, have believed technology is what's going to make the difference. As part of our strategy, as a business strategy, we ride on the bus of the technology to deliver the services. And unless technology takes a driving position, which in so many cases, the bank was about 10 years back, it did not believe that it can drive, it can use a technology-oriented strategy. But technology came out and took the leadership. With me working with my team, came and said, hey, what if we bring the first check deposit application in Puerto Rico, So we did that, and we demonstrated that. The other thing that we did was we were the first bank, actually even compared to the United States, we do have today capable, if you apply for a mortgage, and we say, okay, go to this website, and it will give you a Federal Express sort of tracking, different stages, applied, processed, pending documents, and then finally it says schedule a closing time. So if you look at the mortgage process, it's one of the most anxiety-driven, angst-driven process ever in anybody's life. I think they should not go through that, right? So we make it little steps to sort of say, okay, here's what we expect, and we will keep you posted. It's not that we can close the mortgage in 20 days. We got to go through these steps, but at least if we keep you posted, you would stay engaged, and you would feel less anxious about this process, right? So that was another way of technology driving the business, right? So I think the technology needs to take what business today is not enabled by technology. Right? So if the most people, when you say, okay, I'll find out the requirements, that's wrong, as you point out, because I think it's because business people cannot think technology. right?
Yeah.
And they don't want to change their business as well. It's not that everything is what they do is right.
Yeah.
So if you're going to hear from what they want, I think you're sub-optimizing the value of technology in your organization.
Yeah, Ganesh, just as you were saying that point about what business isn't wholly dependent on it these days, there's a group of people and somebody says, so you're telling me the concrete industry is being driven by technology? Yeah.
It is.
Intelligent concrete.
Exactly.
Intelligent buildings, all of those things. How do you get the truck there a little bit quicker, and how do you reduce wear and tear?
Exactly. Supply chain, reducing material costs, you name it. I don't think there's any industry out there which is not touched by technology.
Yeah.
But the question of how are you going to use your technology to reinvent the business model that you have,
yeah.
I think that's what the key is. If you continue, any industry that is not facing competition or any firm that's not facing competition, I don't think they will adopt technology fast.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you are put in a situation that you have to fight for the market share. Mm-hmm. And I think you would see the quicker adoption of technologies in those firms.
Ganesh, I got to tell you, one of the most interesting discussions about technology, and this was at an event I was at, say 10 years ago, but it was a guy from the University of Michigan, C.K. Prahalad, who's this incredible professor, and he had CIOs, CFOs, CEOs from biggest companies in the world sitting around a table like this, riveted, and he was telling them the story about Build-A-Bear. Mm-hmm. And he said, you go in and this bloody bear costs 50 cents, but by the time everybody walks out with their bear,
it's $50, $60.
At least that, and they have your child's birthday, and
exactly.
This and this and this and on like that. So it's this willingness to put the customer at the center of things, the customer experience. And yes, the bear, or as he put it, the bloody 50-cent bear is great, but it turns into an experience that is vastly more valuable and interesting. And I think there the technology has that edge too, but it also, I think, is the thing that unlocks the potential of people trapped in organizations where you said, go sit at the kids' table, go sit at the kids' table. Somebody executive comes into my branch, he doesn't know my name, he doesn't really give a crap. I'm going to go look somewhere else for something to do. So
or call the secretary to print a form, and you can only take 2 pages, and you don't know So you're right.
And there's so much to be done, but I think your outlook that you have, it seems to be typified by what you're doing there at the bank. Yes, there are challenges, but you are taking that broad view.
And the most important aspect of that is, obviously, we want to be technologically advanced, right? But the problem with our size bank is we cannot play with the big boys, right? So I think the type of technology that we are now settling on are the ones that will enable smaller organizations to be nimble, to make the changes, to not rely on external resources, or to have a large IT department of 100 people, programming. These are the kinds of things that we are trying to avoid. We had external resources in the previous applications that we used because it was fragmented, it required a lot of programming. We eliminated those things. But we have in human resources, not that we had headcount resource savings, but in human resources, we have more business partners that work with business teams on their operational issue aspects of it, how to manage people, how to strategically play a role. So you see the role of in the department has changed, which sort of mimics what I was talking to you about the role of the bank with our consumer.
Yes.
We're not mainly dealing with check cashing, locking the card, unlocking the card, or whatever, reissuing the card, or printing checks for you, but we want to aspire for other things. So I think this is sort of a little inside outside. It's a sort of the same philosophy that we are trying to pursue.
So Ganesh, here at Workday Rising, there's been a lot of talk about AI, machine learning, and so on like that. Is that an exciting prospect for you?
Yes, it is. But I think AI, when was the first time you heard the term AI? In 1960s,
that
right?
Was a long time. Yeah.
So what is it different this time? I think it's not a science project anymore. At the same time, in my opinion, but for very few organizations, commercial enterprises like banks, it's not artificial intelligence. It's basically heuristics based, different rules, and you have the ability to refine the rule as you go, and there is a little bit of self-learning. So to me, if somebody says artificial intelligence, please don't consider that as what we talked about back in 70s or there's not going to be an Android robot, which so I think artificial intelligence is a lot of rules about the business and understanding, making sense of data. There are certain areas that it's applicable in. Like for instance, we have a huge amount of data about the loans that we have done over the years, and buried in that data is why loans go bad. The existential question of any banker, right? We are, we think that AI can be applied to parse out, but there's no guarantee that past circumstances would exist again. Like for instance, if somebody said 2008 financial crisis is going to happen exactly like that, well, you can really say, okay, the first part of the statement is correct, which is there's going to be a financial crisis at some point in time, but the situations that leading up to it is not exactly the same. So that's what don't quote me on this, but the regulators would make regulations to prevent that one, right?
That things don't exist
exactly.
in a steady state.
So AI to me is helpful, but I'm not holding my breath. It's buzzwords, a lot of marketing speak, machine language, machine learning, AI. I think if you take it with a pinch of salt and take a very practical approach, let me use that for dissecting the data, because history is a good teacher of for what to avoid and what to pursue, right? So from that perspective, yes, but I do not see. I used to work for Gartner and Gartner Group.
Sure.
So they always publish this for any piece of technology that's coming up, a hype cycle. I think we've gone to the extent that the height of the hype, and we're probably dripping down to the trough of disillusionment is what they call it, right? So we are getting there. We soon the reality would be there are areas AI can be applied, but we're not holding our breath.
Yeah, I thought that some of the things that they showed with Prism and some of the things going on here specifically applied to where you flip the model, and right, of having mobs of people go hunt for the data to find it, then to try to think, what can I do with this? Instead, can one of the first steps in this be push the right data to the people so that people can do what people are good at, which is think?
Correct. Yeah.
And that could be a start.
Exactly.
I try to be an optimist.
So that's where we are looking at Prism too, to sort of push the data, whatever they say, timely, appropriate, and whatever, at the hands of the people, right place, right time, so that they can make their decision rather than making the decision on behalf of them. On the other hand, I think a lot of customer service tasks could be automated. People don't like automated robots, but I think it holds a lot of promise. I do think that they will get better and better. There's no reason why we should not start experimenting, but we should be cognizant of the fact that if you're not able to handle it in an automated way, you should still have the people behind it to take over. And a lot of companies do miss that point, So we are internally sort of looking into an initiative to see how we can deploy customer service robots, chatbots, and that's the one area that I would be interested in.
Ganesh, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for your time and insights. And many thanks to all of you for joining us here on Cloud Wars Live, where we explore the unfolding adventures of digital business, digital life, and how these are profoundly changing the way we live, work, play, and experience the world. I hope you'll join us for other episodes of Cloud Wars Live. Please share your feedback with me at bobevanspa@gmail.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.